Welcome, everyone. I'm Dan Levinson from Sendmark, and I'm joined by Todd Herr, one of the co-editors of DMARC BIS. If you're in email security or email marketing, you might be seeing a great number of headlines touting DMARC BIS as an upcoming standard. Today, we're going to unpack what DMARC BIS is and how that might be impacting your upcoming email security initiatives. Todd joins us as the principal solution architect at Green Arrow. He has many years of experience in the space, on the sender side, the receiver side, and a number of vendors. And he has worked tirelessly to bring DMARC BIS to life. Thank you, Todd.
Good to be here today.
Cheers. So, Todd, for anyone who hasn't been following closely, why is now the right time?
What motivated DMARC BIS, the original DMARC spec, RFC 7489, was released in 2015. It was released in the IETF lingo, it was called an informational standard, as opposed to an actual proposed standard or standards track document, which puts it maybe a cut lower as far as rigor and requirements for implementing it and such. We wanted to change that. We wanted to make it an actual standards document within the IETF RFC process. We've also learned a lot of lessons over the last 10 years on what DMARC implementations problems can exist, where there were some shortcomings in DMARC that could be fixed by an update to the spec. So the working group got to convened a number of years ago. I was not originally part of the process. I got into the process pretty deeply in 2020, and my role was co-editor with John Levine. Wrote a lot of the document that exists today, the main standards document. One of the other things that motivated this work, the original DMARC spec had discussions of the two reporting types in the spec itself. What you'll see in this go-round, we've broken those out into their own documents. That allows for easier changes in the future should any, and I don't know of any changes that are even being contemplated, let alone planned, but if some sort of change arises to, say, the aggregate reporting protocol, that document itself can be updated without going through a full revision of the entire DMARC protocol at that time. So that's the main drivers behind the work that's been done. As far as why now, the IETF document production process can be a really slow beast. So it's why now, because we couldn't get it done earlier than this. We actually had the DMARC BIS and the aggregate reporting specs done back in the spring, and then we realized that the failure reporting document hadn't quite been finished. So there's been a 6-month pause waiting for that to finish. That was finally sent to IETF published status, meaning the beginning of the publication status, a week or two ago. So I expect that without any sort of problems going forward, I expect that all 3 documents will hopefully be released in 2026.
So a mere coincidence that DMARC BIS is becoming closer to an official standard, where we've seen that sender requirements have also captured a great number of headlines?
Yeah, I don't think the two are really tightly related. Mailbox providers have been interested in seeing authenticated mail for quite a long time. They use authenticated identities as an anchor for reputation systems. And they have asked senders for a number of years, please authenticate your mail, please authenticate your mail. They offered BIMI. BIMI was a carrot to get domains to do authentication, right? You have to be doing DMARC, you have to be at P equal quarantine or P equal reject in order for BIMI and to work for you and for that logo to display. So BIMI was this carrot. If you do the DMARC thing, you can get your logo displayed as well. They didn't have great adoption with that. And I think finally the mailbox providers just said, you know what, we're basically, they won't call it no auth, no entry, but they're basically at that point now where if you don't authenticate your mail and you're a larger sender, you're not getting your mail accepted. But I wouldn't call that, I don't think that the two are tightly related.
All right.
Yeah.
And based on the great number of years that DMARC has been in practice, is it safe to say that it's an effective method at stopping abuse and directionally improving deliverability?
DMARC's purpose is to stop same domain spoofing. And I think it can do that quite well, especially with direct mail flows where, I'm sending directly to another domain. We know about the problems with indirect mail flows with mailing lists and such, and we can talk about that a little later. As far as DMARC helping with deliverability, as I said earlier, mailbox providers want to see authenticated identifiers so that they can attach reputation to them. It's not enough just to publish a DMARC record. That's not enough to get you to the inbox. You have to do other things well. You have to send mail that people want from that authenticated identifier in order to get to the inbox, and in order to give your future mail the best chance to get to the inbox. The analogy I always use is you just can't walk into a bank with a driver's license and say, I want to take out a loan. Okay, well, you are who you say you are, but let's look up your credit history. Do you have a good credit history? Oh, you don't? Well, you're not going to get a loan just because you got the driver's license. You have to have both things in place. And so that where DMARC helps you get to the inbox is you are sending from an authenticated identity that has a history of sending mail people want.
Great. All right, let's get into some of the changes themselves. For the senders themselves, what are the most significant changes that DMARC BIS brings to the table?
Honestly, many senders today, especially marketers, those that are sending from, say, sales.company.com, the new DMARC will be really a no-op. There's a few minor tags in there that we'll get to that have been removed, but it's not going to be a big deal for the sending side. For the larger domains, such as universities, which have multiple levels of DNS throughout their, you got school.edu, and then under school you've got department.edu, whatever. We now have in DMARC BIS the concept of what's called a tree walk to find the organizational domain. It used to be, with original DMARC, if the sending domain didn't have a DMARC record published, the receiving domain would have to figure out what the organizational domain is based on the public suffix list or whatever, and go look for the DMARC record there. Now, with a tree walk, if it's sending from a.b.c.d.e.com, if that domain doesn't have a DMARC record, it's going to hack off the first domain. So it's going to go look at b.c.d.e.com and so forth up that way. So it allows for distributed management of DMARC policies across large organizations. Again, not a big deal for marketers and such that are just sending from a subdomain of their company's domain. There are a few tags that have been added and removed. One of the tags that's been added that isn't really applicable to marketers, but I'll mention it because it is getting some publicity, is the NP tag. N as in no. And the NP tag is analogous to the SP tag. You can set a policy for subdomains of your organizational domain that don't exist. That's going to be used probably only for the public suffix domains. This is something we took from RFC 9091. RFC 9091 was an experimental RFC that put forth this NP tag. It's being incorporated now into DMARC BIS, and RFC 9091 is going to be rendered obsolete when DMARC BIS is published. A few other tags that have gone away. The percent tag, the PCT tag, has gone away. That tag was never consistently implemented. I don't think it was very well documented in 7489 because one can't tell during an ongoing mail flow, right? How do I know you're sending me 100 messages, right? I've seen 10 of the messages you're going to be sending me. How do I know that? How do I apply a percentage to a flow that hasn't completed yet? So there was going to be some difficulty. There was a suggestion in 7489 how to roughly do the percentage thing, but there was always going to be some difficulty in applying that, and folks never really understood how it worked, so we dropped it. It's being replaced by a tag T, which basically stands for testing. And the reason it's being replaced at all is because there was one use case for the percent tag that was meaningful. Mail that was being sent into Google Groups and some other places. If your policy was P equal quarantine, percent equals 0, that got treated, I mean, that's effectively saying P equal none, but that got treated differently in a way that allowed for better reporting as it was working its way through the Google Groups system. I don't know all the details behind that, but I know it was something that was necessary in order to get the best DMARC reporting out of mail that was being sent into Google. Because that functionality still needs to exist, and because it doesn't make sense to have a tag labeled percent that only has two valid values, 0 and 100, we replaced that with a T equal Y and T equal N. And I seem to recall T equal Y is the same as percent equals 0, but I'd have to look it up. And really, there's a couple of other tags that were related to reporting that nobody really used anyway that are gone as well. But the good news is, just like with RFC 7489 and even with DKIM before it, both the spec says if you're parsing a DMARC DNS record and you come across a tag that doesn't exist in your implementation of DMARC, ignore it. So, whether you have these non-existent tags or not, won't be an impact to your DMARC record.
Let's talk first about interoperability, and then can go to deprecation of PCT.
Let me start by saying the good news. While some tags that existed in 7489 don't exist in DMARC BIS, and some new tags exist in DMARC BIS that weren't there in 7489, just like 7489 and even just like DKIM before it, the spec says if you're parsing a DMARC record and you run across a tag that doesn't exist in your implementation of DMARC, ignore it. So no breaking changes whatsoever. We can talk about the change to tags now. The percent tag is going away. The implementation of the percent tag was inconsistent at best. And so it really doesn't, I don't think anybody really implemented it well. It's almost impossible to implement well simply because if I ask you to do something to 10% of the mail you see using my domain, how do you know when you've done it to 10% of the mail using my domain? You don't know it in the moment. You know it after the fact, right? At the end of the day, you can say, well, how many messages did I see using this domain? But you can't go back then and retroactively apply the policy. There was one use case, though, with percent that was meaningful. Mail that was sent into Google Groups with a policy of quarantine and percent of 0, which is effectively policy P equal none. That mail was handled differently within Google in such a way that the reporting made much more logical sense when you saw the aggregate reports coming out of Google. I don't know the technical details behind what they were doing there, but in order to preserve that functionality, we've replaced percent equal whatever with a T tag, T equal Y or T equal N. And as I recall, the T equal Y mimics the percent equal 0, just to preserve that use case. A couple other tags, the RF tag went away. Was the RF or RI? I can't remember.
FR and RI, yes.
Okay. A couple tags related to reporting have gone away. Just the reporting interval one was one that, honestly, the mail receivers never honored anything other than send a report once a day, every 24 hours. You could ask for aggregate reports every 12 hours, but nobody's going to do it. So just minor stuff like that.
All right. There's also the introduction of the NP tag, which I'd be very interested to see how folks...
Yeah, the NP tag is similar to the SP tag. It's a way for a domain to set policy for anything below it. Now, the NP tag, unlike the SP tag, is for subdomain. The NP tag is for non-existent subdomains. Personally, I don't believe mail from non-existent domains should be accepted, but That's just my personal view. The NP tag is really only supposed to be used by top-level domains, the public suffix domains. It's something that was inherited from RFC 9091. That was an experimental RFC designed to introduce this NP tag. DMARC BIS is making 9091 obsolete, so we've incorporated the NP tag into DMARC BIS. But again, it's something only for public suffix domains. It's not something that I don't imagine SendMark's customers are going to worry about too much.
And by way of public suffix domains, that's .com,
Correct.
.mil,
Yeah.
.org, etc.
Yeah,
Okay. And then there's also mention of full participation in there, which is consistent with other standards where it's bordering along the lines of a recommendation, but holds just short of saying this will actually give you any benefits.
Yeah, there's for years, ever since DMARC ever since DMARC was published, there are a number of companies in the market say we do DMARC, and numbers. Just companies all over the marketplace that say we do DMARC, but there was never anything that codified what that meant. DMARC BIS has a chapter, a section in it that lists, in order to say you fully participate in DMARC, you must do these things, both for domain owners and for receivers. So that's there, but again, with the IETF, there are no such thing as protocol police. So even if somebody claims to do DMARC, if they don't meet that whole thing, there's nobody to put them in cuffs and send them to jail or anything. But this way, at least we all can speak from the same language and say, this is what it means to fully participate in DMARC these days. That's Section 8 in DMARC BIS is where that's laid out.
All right, and some of the contents there talks about adopting both SPF and DKIM alignment. It also talks about having an actual reporting address, an RUA target,
Right.
so you can receive reports.
Right.
And I believe the recommendation, or rather the full adoption, suggests that you should actually be reading the reports.
Right. Yeah.
As
I mean,
well.
that's right. We mentioned the mailbox providers earlier with their requirements that you do DMARC, and all they've required up to now is just publishing a policy, no RUA tag whatsoever. That's cool, but that's not going to help you as a domain owner really authenticate your mail. You need those reports in order to figure out where the gaps are in your authentication so that you can fix that and then theoretically move on to quarantine or reject. So DMARC BIS, we talk about if you're fully participating in DMARC, best idea is send with SPF aligned, send DKIM aligned. There's a line in there about if you have P equal reject, don't rely on only SPF passing in order to get a DMARC pass. And again, have the RUA tag and have it pointing to a mailbox that you read, or that you either hire a company to read for you, or you have tools to read, because aggregate reports, they're XML documents. Nobody wants to read them by hand.
All right, and then from the receiver side, I believe there's two. One about including all selectors that are inside a message. A message can have
Right,
multiple
right.
selectors. We know that there's great adoption of that, or the reports that we see through SendMark. It's not everyone, and so there's gaps in data which can cause some confusion, making those consuming the reports think that because the selector has not been included that there's actually no DKIM signature. This is an issue there. And then the second part about honoring the entire list of RUA
Right.
and RUF targets.
Yeah, it's a problem if you send mail with multiple DKIM signatures and you don't get in your report the entire list of which ones passed and which one failed. That can be a problem, especially if you're getting back something that says one that maybe you don't own passed, but you don't know how the one you did own passed. So yes, include all DKIM results in the aggregate report is part of full participation. As far as sending reports to all the addresses in the RUA tag, 7489 said that you can list as many addresses as you want there, but receivers are only required to send to 2 of those mailboxes. Now, I don't know anybody out there who's listing hundreds of RUA mailboxes, but if you are a domain owner that has 3 or 4 or 5 different RUA addresses because you're I don't know, comparing DMARC services during some sort of bake-off or whatever, you can get, or mailbox providers that are doing full participation in DMARC will send reports to all of those mailboxes.
There's a number of changes that are coming. Some are more impactful than others, and it sort of leads into what some of the benefits are of having an enterprise capable reporting service to not only accommodate the changes, but also the added benefits of that subject matter expertise to help guide the senders through the adoption of DMARC BIS and help have a successful project with having fewer and fewer questions. Great. All right, so let's talk about from the receiver side. There's a couple changes there as well. Also consistent with the document on a whole is to bring greater clarity, provide examples, as well as full participation. So for the receiver side, what are some of the larger changes?
Well, the biggest change is what's called the DNS tree walk, is the method for finding the applicable DMARC policy for a given message. With 7489, we looked at the sender domain, the RFC 5322 from domain. If that didn't have a DMARC record published, we would go look at the organizational domain, and we would get the organizational domain from the public suffix list. For most senders, that was fine because the sending domain was maybe one level below the organizational domain, right? Marketing.company.com was sending mail. If there was no DMARC record published there, go look at company.com, boom, you're done. But what that didn't account for was the smaller cohort of large domains, and when I say large, I mean organizationally large domains, that might have multiple levels of DNS throughout their infrastructure, sending from multiple different places where they push out the DNS management to some of these lower levels. The classic example is a university, where the organizational domain is university.edu, but within any university, you got a number of schools, right? Say the math and science school and the humanities school and the arts school, whatever. And within those schools, then you would have departments. And maybe the university IT staff is pushing DNS management out to the school level. And then within the schools, they've got departments sending mail. So now you've got math.sciences.university.edu. And the sciences department wants to have a DMARC policy that's different than what the main university policy is. So that with the DNS tree walk, the search is now start at math.sciences.university.edu. And if you don't find it there, go up one level to sciences.university.edu, which allows them to publish a DMARC policy record different from the organizational domain. Again, that's not something that a lot of customers are going to care about, but it is something to be aware of for larger organizations, large complex organizations. Schools and government mostly.
All right. So I'm seeing that there's a theme here, which is DMARC BIS is really looking at the real life experiences that we've all had for the past 10 plus years, and it's looking to grow on that. So this is more of a correction and something that was either not feasible or something that wasn't apparent when it was originally.
I'd say a lot wasn't apparent was a lot of that. I mean, I'll give you another example of what wasn't apparent in 2015 is readily apparent now. Privacy, right? Initial DMARC spec had forensic reports or failure reports in them, which were conceived to be entire copies of email messages that had failed authentication sent to the domain owner. Great idea in theory, and then they start thinking, well, let's see. I'm a domain owner. I'm a bank, right? Some bad guy spoofs my domain, sends mail to you. You're not my customer. I have no idea who you are. But I get back this full message. Now I've got your email address. I don't deserve to have your email address. And with GDPR and CCPA and everything else that came along, we saw that the forensic reports the failure reports got hacked into pieces, right? Everything's redacted out of them now. So lots of lessons learned since 2015.
All right. So DMARC BIS marks a big shift as DMARC itself moves from informal to RFC to a standard. So beyond the technical details here, what does the change signal about maturity of email authentication in general?
I think given the relatively low scale of change that we're seeing with DMARC, I think the maturity is already there. But there's some energy behind this thing that they're calling DKIM2 for the moment. In the next 3 to 5 years, I would guess that innovation in email authentication would be in DKIM2. Of course, 3 years from now, they may be working on something else. Who knows? But I don't see this. I don't see DMARC BIS as a revolution so much as an evolution. It's just the next, sanding off some of the rough patches and going forward with what we got.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about some of the guidance that we can give to mailing lists. We know that has been a challenge for the initial DMARC rollout. It represents a very specific use case that has maybe made more noise than we also had anticipated.
Well, and I would say that the guidance that's in DMARC BIS isn't for mailing lists. It's for domain owners that have users who send to mailing lists. The pain with mailing lists or other indirect flows, it's been well known ever since SPF and DKIM were published. With SPF, mail that goes through multiple hops can fail SPF because of conditions where the return path isn't changed at an interim hop. But now the message is coming, as far as you're concerned, the message is coming from a hop that isn't in the SPF record. With DKIM, mailing lists especially can add headers or footers to a message and break the signature. Given that, you might sit there and think, well, who cares? Who uses mailing lists? Well, the IETF uses mailing lists. The organization that defines the standards for the internet. The formal working group work as defined by the IETF is done on mailing lists. Yes, they have meetings 3 times a year or more, but the actual work, mailing lists is where it is. So that makes mailing lists take on a very high sense of importance when it comes to email authentication. So the guidance in DMARC BIS is about domain owners should not publish P equal reject if their users participate in mailing lists. It should be P equal quarantine. And there's also guidance in there that receivers should not reject a message solely based on authentication failures and a P equal reject policy, that they should be other factors they take into place before they reject it. We've seen for years anyway that domains publish P equal reject, but it's not honored. Mail gets routed to the spam folder instead. Mailbox providers want to make sure that their customers get the mail that they want. That's their guiding principle. So they would rather err on the side of caution and accept stuff that might be a little dodgy rather than reject stuff that the customer actually wanted.
Is it also true that certain mailing list software or platforms can treat mail and accommodate DMARC in a better light?
IETF mailing lists do it now. If some of the mailing lists are configured, maybe all of them now, I don't know, but the ones I'm on are configured in such a way that if you're sending from a domain that has a P equal reject policy, it'll rewrite your from domain to basically a non-existent one to make sure that it doesn't fail DMARC downstream when it's passed on to all the subscribers.
Okay, so that guidance maybe is dependent on
I can't remember if there's discussion of that in DMARC BIS or not about rewriting the from domain to make sure that it doesn't fail downstream. But the guidance that is in there is mostly about making sure you publish policies that aren't going to cause problems if your people are participating in indirect flows.
And I think this only reiterates the importance of actually evaluating the DMARC records themselves, gradually moving through according to best practices, using testing mode, et cetera.
Right. Always start at P equal none and move on from there.
Okay, so now let's talk about the expected timeline for DMARC BIS. We know that we're getting closer and closer to what?
Someday, 3 documents will be published, officially published by the IETF, given actual RFC numbers. I don't know what those numbers will be. The current status, the aggregate reporting document, and DMARC BIS, the main spec, were turned over to the IETF RFC editors many months ago, but they were put on pause because of the ongoing work with the failure reporting document. There was an open question as to whether or not the failure reporting document would actually be published. And if it wasn't going to be published, then DMARC-BIS had to be modified quite a bit to remove all the references to DMARC failure reporting document. Last couple weeks, the DMARC failure reporting document has now started down the journey of being handed off to the RFC editors. The working group is finished with it, as far as I understand. There's still several rounds of review from the IETF community at large. The DMARC-BIS and DMARC aggregate reporting documents, the RFC editors will now take a whack at them. I know when we were prepping for this interview earlier today, I found a glaring misspelling in the DMARC-BIS specs. So there'll definitely be at least one more rev of it. As to when they'll actually be published, I don't know. As to when they'll actually be adopted after publication, there's not going to be a flag day. As we talked earlier, you can live in a DMARC pre-BIS world right alongside a DMARC-BIS world because of the fact that they say if you see a tag you don't recognize, ignore it. It's going to take, I imagine, some amount of time for the receivers to get their code libraries updated to actually do the DMARC tree or the DNS tree walk to find the organizational domain. So when they'll do that, how much energy they'll put into that, I don't know. But I do not anticipate anybody pressing a button and say, okay, today's DMARC-BIS day, let's go. So.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions with DMARC or DMARC-BIS. Is there anything that you've regularly heard that you want to couch now?
Two things. One, as I said earlier, having DMARC by itself does not get you to the inbox. You must be a good sender along with that email authentication. The other one that I hear from time to time is strict alignment is much more secure than relaxed alignment. We've seen no data to support that idea. Relaxed alignment is much easier to do, and so just don't anybody tell you strict alignment's better.
We can add La Poste to the list of prominent mailbox providers who have also rolled out sender requirements that rely heavily on DMARC and SPF and DKIM. So in general, would you expect other mailbox providers to join the ranks?
In general, sure. Again, mailbox providers want to see authenticated mail. They've been asking for it for years and years. And it's just human nature that you don't do anything until it hurts. And so a lot of domains never adopted authenticated email because they were getting their mail accepted. And now that we're at a point where certain classes of senders aren't getting their mail accepted because they're not authenticating properly, well, they're getting religion. They're starting to authenticate now. So for those mailbox providers that, because Google and Yahoo, and I think even Microsoft have put their toe in the water now, but because Google and Yahoo have these requirements, and because they're such big sites for people to send mail to, I don't imagine there are too many larger senders out there that are sending unauthenticated mail to other mailbox providers. They could be, who knows? But as soon as, if there are mailbox providers out there who aren't seeing authenticated email at a level they want, I would imagine they could put in that requirement too.
All right, let's talk about if you were, let's say, an email security or DMARC practitioner, and you're hoping to convey the value of these standards and these practices to, let's say, a less technical executive or leadership team.
It's a challenge. I don't think anybody appreciates the risk they have of being spoofed until they're spoofed. What you can do is you can consume the reports. If you see information in there that indicates that your domain is being spoofed at a high level or at a high volume, that might be enough to start the conversation of, hey, we might have a problem here. Because what you want to guard against is having your brand reputation degrade amongst your customers, right? So if I'm a brand you trust, but somebody is successful in spoofing me and sends mail to you, and somehow you lose money in the deal, it's not my. I didn't take your money. I didn't cause you to lose your money. But the fact that I wasn't doing DMARC, I didn't put out a signal saying all of my mail is authenticated. I guess you could be indirectly responsible for that. I don't know if that's enough to convince people at the C level to spend whatever money is necessary to do DMARC, but that's the kind of argument you can make. That, or if you see within your company a round of phishing that is spoofing your own domain and coming in from the world, and your employees start falling for it. DMARC is a tool that you can use to fight against that. However, you can also have a policy that no external mail from local domains is allowed to be accepted. So it's a challenge, and I appreciate that it's a challenge. And I think that's one of the things that's caused DMARC adoption to not be worldwide, is because it's hard to demonstrate the value until you need it, right? You don't care if your door's locked until somebody tries to come in through your door.
And for anybody who says that possibly DMARC to date has been too complex, and they suggest that maybe DMARC BIS introduces, an additional responsibility to keep up with the changes, what might you say to them?
Yeah, DMARC BIS is getting rid of some of the complexity. The percent tag was a complexity that was never really properly implemented. I don't see any added complexity in DMARC BIS versus DMARC. DMARC is a way for you to announce to the world that you authenticate your mail. Mail that uses your domain should be properly authenticated before it's accepted. And this new version of DMARC, this update to DMARC does not make it any more complex than it was. I don't think.
I think the spec is longer because it takes the time to include examples and
Fair.
reduce
Yeah,
nearly a decade's worth of practicing.
It is quite long, and I will take the fall for that, because I've never met a word that I couldn't add 3 more words to when I was writing. But there's a requirement in any RFC that it be definitive for any implementer. There isn't any other authority you can have in implementing a protocol that's defined other than that document. So it has to be, I believe it has to err on the side of wordiness in order to make sure that not only are you specifying what the protocol is, but also answering any questions people might have about the implementation, because that's the document. That's it. That's the standard.
Occasionally, we'll field the question seemingly coming from somebody who's less familiar with the standard or is less technical, maybe in leadership, that begs the question, what's the ROI on a DMARC implementation? Is there any stat or any way to quantify what DMARC could bring, either directly or indirectly?
Well, if you're the type of sender that won't get their mail accepted if you're not authenticating, then whatever value you place on your email program is your ROI, because you're actually getting that mail accepted. If you, and when I say type of sender that has to authenticate, it's based on volume at the moment. It may be based on other things in the future, but if you're a high volume sender, you want to get your mail accepted, you have to authenticate it. If you're a lower volume sender who doesn't have to authenticate mail to get it accepted, what's your reputation worth? What's your brand worth to you? Because as we talked earlier, if you are spoofed and if your customers lose any level of trust in your brand, any level of trust in the mail they see from your brand, they're going to stop engaging with it. They're going to stop opening it. So if I look at my mailbox and I see mail from danlevinson.com, and I don't trust danlevinson.com anymore because I opened that one message a couple months ago and it was some sort of scam, I'm not going to open your message this time. So I don't know how to quantify that. That may be more an intangible value, but it's still there.
All right. And lastly, I'll ask you to look ahead, let's say 3 to 5 years. We anticipate DMARC adoption to grow, similarly with other standards like MTA TLS, BIMI, et cetera. Beyond these table stakes best practices and protocols today, what can you see in your crystal ball about where the space might be heading towards?
Well, 5 years, I hope I'm retired. We talked DKIM2 earlier. That's the current email authentication hot button issue. If they're successful, I'm sure that will be released in the next probably fewer than 3 years. At least that's the momentum they want to push. But publishing a spec and actually implementing it are two widely different things. I'm not aware of any other work being done to advance email authentication at this time. And I don't anticipate a DMARC try happening in the next 3 to 5 years. BIS is Latin for second, and try would be Latin for third. So DKIM2 is the only thing I see in my cloudy crystal ball.
All right. And how about speculating on the sender requirements fronts? We've seen that that the screws are beginning to be turned. Is it fair to say directionally that
maybe. The mailbox providers are always obliquely hinting at other things coming. I don't work for a mailbox provider. I anticipate that the mailbox providers will do what they have to do to make sure that their mailbox holders get mail that they want and that they don't get mail that they don't want. What that looks like with authentication, maybe they start requiring that there be a RUA tag. Maybe they lower the volume minimum for domains to be required. Right now it's 5,000 a day. Mm-hmm. Maybe they lower it to 1,500, 2,500. I don't know. But I would not anticipate that the requirements that they are today are as tough as they'll ever get. I expect it'll be tougher someday.
That's fair.
Yeah.
All right, well, I want to thank you greatly for the time here today, as well as acknowledge there are a great number of other individuals that contributed to both the original DMARC and DMARC BIS, so we want to make sure that they have the proper...
Well, they're all named in the document.
And they are, and so thank you to yourself and to everybody else for helping making internet a safer place. I think that's what we are striving towards.
Thank you. Been great.